All right, so like most of you this morning, got up, jumped in the shower, but in order for the shower, like the water to come out of the shower head, I had to turn on the shower valve. And then in order for the water to be hot, I had to mess with the thermostat, right? The dial, the temperature dial on my shower. And then finished the shower, got ready, got in my car. In order for my car to start, I have to press on the brake and then push in the ignition button for my car to start. Then I back out of the driveway and I start going through my neighborhood. In order for me to get here from Wake Forest, I had to navigate through some stop signs that tell me to stop. And then there's a traffic circle coming out of my neighborhood, so I have to go right. We're required to go right counterclockwise around the traffic circles. And then got on the road, and I had to go through several lights that inform me whether I'm supposed to go or whether I'm supposed to stop. And then I could only travel in lanes that were designated for the direction that I was going in order to get here. And then when I got here, I park in Home Depot like I've been for years. And so when I pulled into the parking lot at Home Depot, there are lines that are painted on the pavement that tell me how to park and where to park. And then I got out of my car and I walked across the grass and to this building. And in order for me to get into this building, the door's locked. The only way I could get in the building is with a key fob, and I had to put it on the door, and the door opened up. So I know what you're saying. You're like, so what? Like, why are you telling me all of this? What does that even matter? Where are you going with all of this? This morning, for me to get to this spot on the platform, there were some external forces that I had to submit to. Practices, laws, for me to get to this spot. And so basically, I was submitting myself to the authority of something or someone to get to this spot on the platform. Whether I want to acknowledge it or not, I had to submit to the authority of a little knob on my shower in order for me to get hot water. And I would still be in my driveway right now if I did not submit to starting my car the way it's supposed to be started. Now, I know that sounds simple, but whether you want to acknowledge it or not, every single day of your life, you are submitting to the authority of someone or something. Every day. Now, I just gave you examples of the simple things in life. But then it gets more complicated and more significant. And so we choose to submit ourselves to something or someone for really important stuff in our life. Meaning, purpose, morality, direction. We all submit ourselves to someone or something. Maybe you haven't thought about it. So this week, we're in week 3 of our series on the Bible. And so a little bit different series. It's actually bibliology, the study of the Bible. These first 3 weeks, we've been just talking about the Bible. Can't wait till next week where we'll talk about, okay, this is how you read it, knowing all of this. But week 3, we started in week 1 just putting it out there that although we have so much access to the Bible, mobile devices, the Bible in printed form all over the place. You go into a hotel and there's the Bible in the drawer, right? The Bible is all over the place, and we have access to more resources that explain the Bible, tell us how to read the Bible than we've ever had in history. And yet, Bible reading is at an all-time low. So we talked about that week 1, and we said that the objective of this series just came right out. The objective of the series is to move the needle forward for this family. That as a result of this series, more of us would be reading the Bible, more of us would be reading it with understanding, and thus more of us would be transformed by the reading of it. Why? Why this series? Why so much emphasis on the Bible? Well, because if we're going to accomplish the mission of Jesus, and if we're going to accomplish the mission of 7 marks, which is pattern after Jesus, practicing the way of Jesus together, then it's going to involve us approaching this with Jesus' perspective, with his posture, and the practices or lifestyle that was informed by the Bible. And it's the second mark of 7 marks, right? That a disciple is one who pursues the lifestyle of Jesus. And so what was Jesus' perspective about the Bible? What did he think about it? Did he even acknowledge it? Did he care? Did it matter? And the short answer is yes. And in fact, when Jesus came on the scene in the New Testament, we begin to read about him. We see that he says, I am the living, breathing fulfillment of everything that's been written so far. All of the scrolls, all the collection, everything that has been written is pointing to me. And then we see him in the New Testament quoting the law, the Hebrew Bible. And then we see different authors that talk about him and his story and the words and his teachings. And then we see these letters that were written at the end of the New Testament that instruct us, his kingdom people, how to live out life that he ushered in through his death, burial, and resurrection. And as Josh pointed out a minute ago, we have this lens that is Jesus-centric. We learn that Jesus is at the center of this story, the Bible, and that we need to keep him there. If we don't keep him there, then we're going to misread, misuse, and misunderstand the Bible. So we have to keep him there. We also learned last week that the Bible is not just one book. It's actually a library of books written by different people on different continents over 1,500 years, and yet it tells one story, one unified story from front to back. You're like, how is that even possible? Divine direction. Divine direction. It was inspired. It was breathed out by God himself. And because it has its origin in him, it's without error. It's trustworthy and true in everything that it affirms. So now today, we're going to amp it up a little bit. We're going to take another step, and we're going to talk about how the Bible is the authority over our lives. Now, I know as soon as I say authority, some of y'all are like, you can't tell me what to do. You can't tell me what to do. We have this, especially in today's society, there's this pause when it comes to authority. And it's like, we're hesitant to trust authority figures. We're hesitant to trust anybody that says, I'm an authority here. Maybe you were raised in an authoritative home, or you work for a boss that's like my way or the highway, or you grew up in a church that had this very controlling nature. Whatever the case, when I say the authority, like this has authority over your life, it causes a little bit of pause, because some of our perspective or perception of the Bible is that it's there to control me. It's there to put its thumb on me of what to do and not do. And then we're like, well, and then some people think that we just have to blindly follow this. Like this is a check your brains at the door book, and we're just going to blindly follow this. And look, and then you're starting like Old Testament, and you're like, really, Paul, that's authoritative for my life? There's some really weird stuff in the Old Testament. And those are all valid. Like your thoughts, your questions, your concerns, those are all valid. But before we entertain them, all right, before we entertain your questions and your thoughts, I think it's important that we understand the picture of the culture that we're living in and how just maybe that has shaped our view. It's shaped how we approach the Bible without us even knowing about it. So I want to reference a couple thoughts from this book entitled The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. And it's by historian Carl Trueman. And he sought to understand and answer this question: how has the current highly individualistic, iconoclastic, I had to look up that word, I didn't even know what that was. That means, iconoclastic means an attack on your cherished held beliefs. So how has the current highly individualistic, iconoclastic, sexually obsessed, and materialistic mindset come to triumph in the West or in America? In short, how did we get so self-absorbed as a culture where it seems like anything goes? And so I don't have time to do his work justice, but he mentions two ways of looking at the world. One is called the mimetic view, that sees the world as with a given meaning and order. God created the heavens and the earth, okay, that idea, where we discover it and then conform our lives to it. That's the mimetic view. On the other hand, there's the poetic view. And the poetic view sees the world as raw material where individuals create and decide meaning and purpose. And he makes the case that in the West or in America, we're moving from the mimetic to the poetic view. And he quotes this philosopher, and he makes this statement: the understanding of life which emerges, so if you, in the transition from one to the other, to the poetic, here's what emerges. Each of us has his or her own way of realizing our humanity, and that it is important to find and live out one's own. In other words, I'm my own authority. As against surrendering to conformity with a model imposed on us from the outside by society, like that's what I was explaining to you on my way here this morning. There were things that I was submitting myself to. So the poetic says, no, that's not it. So as against surrendering to conformity of a model imposed on us from the outside by society, by a previous generation, or religious or political authority. It's pretty fascinating to me. In other words, no one can define truth for me. No one should be able to tell me or can tell me what to do. I will discover it from within myself. Now just think about that just for a minute. And then you wonder why there's so much division in our country, even in our churches, or you wonder why there's some chaos, or you see this moral bankruptcy in our culture. You wonder why. There's pride and arrogance and the problems that we face, the desire to be our own authority. This isn't new. This isn't new. Right? When we got back when we looked at the very beginning of our story, the fall of man, sin entered into the world, and soon after that you read, everybody did what was right in their own eyes. And then when you look in the scripture, and I just want to read a few verses out of Timothy. Remember, we've been in this little letter before where Paul, the Apostle Paul, is instructing Timothy, his young protege, kind of coaching him along. He says this in chapter 3, 2 Timothy, verse 1. But understand this, Timothy, that in the last days there will come times of difficulty, for people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having the appearance of godliness, but denying its power. Timothy, avoid such people. And then in the next chapter, he says this: for the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, listen, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions. Whoever agrees with me, then I'll follow them. Whatever I think about myself, then I'll go ahead and follow their teachings, and they will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths. This isn't new. The Bible wrote about our narcissistic, look at me, find your own truth culture long before this historian and philosopher wrote about it. So we just can't be naive in knowing what kind of culture we are living in and what is happening right in front of us. And that when it comes to the Bible, when you say that the Bible has authority over life, you need to know that you are in a culture that fundamentally is going to reject that. Or at the very least, right, they're going to be suspicious of it. Truth has become relative. It's whatever I want it to be, where people are looking within themselves to discover it and then become what they believe is their authentic self. Now look how this plays out. There is then an insistence, listen, that society should tolerate and accept and even celebrate their personal found truth. What they have decided is true about them. God is nowhere in the picture. He's nowhere in the picture. So into this current climate, culture, this picture comes the authority of the Bible. Again, here's the question. How can you say, Paul, that a book that was written thousands of years ago has authority over my life today? Or as it's said in Christian circles, the final rule for faith and practice. So first, let's talk about what we mean by the word authoritative. Again, the church has done some damage in this area because churches use this to control people or to focus on the rules and the regulations and the do's and the don'ts and the beliefs that we're supposed to adopt. Now, don't get me wrong, that's in there. Okay, that's a small part of this story. It's in there. There are commands that are good for us, that we are to follow, that bring life to us. And it is a guidebook for life, but if we limit it to that, we limit its scope. Remember, the last few weeks we've talked about this. This is a story. This is a narrative. This is a story. It's the story of God in which Jesus is central. And so when we say authoritative, this is what we're saying, that the Bible is a story that is anchored in the authority of the God of the universe. It's anchored in the authority of God himself and can be trusted. It can be trusted as our authority for what we believe and how we live. Now, while all of it is authoritative, true, and trustworthy, all of it isn't applicable and relevant to our day. For example, in the Old Testament, Deuteronomy talks about not wearing clothes of mixed fabrics. Well, we would all have to go home and clean out our closets, all right, if that's true. And then here's another law, that we're not to cook a goat in its mother's milk. I don't even know what to do. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what to do with that law. Or not eat certain foods. Again, a specific command for a specific time and for a purpose. And there's a lot of other verses. I could go through the entire Bible just picking out verses in the Old Testament. It's absolutely make no sense. And without understanding, it could throw us into deep confusion about what we mean when we say that the Bible is authoritative for our lives. The point of saying the Bible is authoritative or has authority over our lives as followers of Jesus is not so we say we have a rule book, right, that's at the ready, or that this is a dummy's guide for life to where we check our brains out at the door and then we don't have to think through things or wrestle with things for wisdom and for decisions. Look, this isn't a tool that squeezes people into a little box or beat them over the head or keep them in line. It's not even a tool where it provides us with all the right answers so that we can beat people up that we feel have all the wrong answers. This book is not simply a bunch of information and right doctrine. It's a story. Allowing the Bible to exercise authority over us happens over time as we immerse ourselves in the story. That's why from the very beginning we have been encouraging you to read this, like to get into it, because when you get into it, then you begin to understand it slowly, not all at once. And then we find that it's in getting into the story that it begins to work on us and in us. And then we learn how to be good ambassadors of carrying this story to a world that deeply needs it. N.T. Wright says it this way: as we submit to Scripture, as we wrestle with the bits that don't make sense, and as we hand through to a new sense that we haven't thought of or seen before, God breathes into our nostrils his own breath, the breath of life, and we become living beings, a church recreated in his image, more fully human, thinking, alive beings. That's what happens. The other night I was sitting with a guy, one of my buddies, and he was talking about what he was currently reading, and I could just see the wheels turning. And the life that he was getting from his time being in the Word. It was informing him, but it was also transforming him. That's what a story does. It's been a couple years since I've been in a movie theater, but it is one of my favorite things to do. I guess part of it is because when I get in a theater, dark room, large screen, loud sound, I just get lost. And then the story comes on the screen, and I get lost in the stories. Stories have that kind of power over you. Even my kids, Caitlin and Kyle, when they were little, man, they wanted me to read them stories when I put them to bed all the time. And even better, if I could make up a story, they like that better. The problem was, like the week later when they wanted me to repeat the story, I had no idea what the details were. So it was never the same story. And then even now with my grandkids, like they want me to read the same exact story time after time after time. Stories help us make sense of things. It helps us connect the dots. And then if you listen to yours, sometimes we tell stories in order to get our point across. And so when you look at the Bible that way, in the sense of storytelling and being captured and immersed in the story, that's a totally different way of looking at the Bible, instead of a rule book, instead of some book that it just kind of beats you down. It's a totally different way. Tim Keller defines it. It's actually a better way of looking at religion. He says this: a set of beliefs that explain what life is all about, who we are, and the most important things that human beings should spend their time doing. So here's some questions. I'm going to give you some questions over the next little bit that I want you to answer. Which story is going to explain what your life is all about? What story? Who you are and the most important things about you being a human. What's going to inform that? Or another way of asking the question, who or what are you going to choose as your authority? Who or what are you going to choose as your authority? So, are you going to be your own authority? You. That's an option for you, but I would tell you that's problematic. Why? Because you're finite. You're finite. You have limited perspective. You have limited information. in history. You're a blip in history like me. So you could choose to be your own authority, but you are limited in that and finite. So the second question is, are you going to let others be the authority in your life? So I want to talk to students for a second. I know there's usually a pocket of students that sit back here. So are you going to allow the conversation in the hallway at school to be your authority? The prevailing word in the hallway or on social media, are you going to allow that to be your authority? Now, adults, you're not off the hook. We get influenced too. Podcasts, blogs, books, how we should dress, what house we should buy, who we should and shouldn't hang out with. Who are you going to allow to be? Here's the question with that too, when you think about it. Who's going to make the list of the people that you're going to allow to inform you and inform your life, to be the authority in your life? Who gets on that list? What's the application to get on that list? And then you have to think that a step further. Who are the people that are informing them that are informing you? See how that could be problematic. So how about the government? How about what's the accepted norm on the street? Whatever story you choose, and there are a lot of stories out there, religious, and then those that aren't religious, but whatever story you choose will shape your life. It will shape your life. And in that way, it will exercise authority over you. Whatever story earns your trust will shape the kind of person you become. Or as one person said, the story you live in is the story you live out. The story you live in is the story that you live out. So that's why I would submit to you to adopt and align to the story of the Bible. That's what I would submit to you. Because with the Bible comes the authority of the never-changing, always consistent God of the universe. When you see that the Bible is a unified story that leads to Jesus, God in the flesh, and you immerse yourself in that story as the true story, then it will only make sense that you would seek to conform your whole life to faithfully embody that story, to let it inform who you are, how you live, what you value, and what you spend your time and life prioritizing. So I would submit to you the scriptures. Align your life to that. Allow that to be the authority of your life. And if you do that, I want to give you just some guardrails. There's a lot of rules. I'm just going to give you a few. And then over the next several weeks, we're going to unpack a couple more. But as you jump into the Bible, there's a couple things, some guardrails. Number one, know whether what you are reading is prescriptive or descriptive. Prescriptive is a command to follow. That's true for everybody, no matter what time in history you live in. So it's love others as I have loved you. Jesus gave his disciples that command. So that's prescribed. That's a command for us to follow. It doesn't matter when you're born, who you are. Right? Descriptive, on the other hand, is just describing something that happened in time. So in the Old Testament, the Exodus, that's a description of what had happened at that time. Or maybe when in the New Testament, if you go to the New Testament and Judas betrayed Jesus and then hung himself, and so they had to replace him, so they cast lots. All right, that's descriptive. We're not going to go out and start casting lots, all right, for stuff. So one, know if it's prescriptive or descriptive. Two, know that many biblical commands are not relevant for us. And I discussed that a little bit earlier. When we look back to the skeleton of the story, you have the entire story, all 7 parts, and we live in the church age. And there are some commands in the Old Testament early on that are not applicable to us or relevant for us in this. It's not that the Old Testament was useless. No, it pointed forward. It advanced the story, but some of those commands are not relevant for us today. So know that when you're reading. A lot of people will take a command in the Old Testament out of context and they would say, see, you have to live this way or obey this particular command. So know that when you're reading, right? When you're putting yourself under the authority of the Bible. Know that our moment in history, now part 5, our moment in history is the same as the first century church. But I have to warn you here, sometimes we read that and you hear comments like, hey, we need to be like the first century church. Well, there were some dynamics in the first century church that would make that impossible today. In today's day, we can learn stuff from them, absolutely. But to impose those upon the church of the 21st century, that would be very difficult and not appropriate. Like, for example, Paul writes to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians, he says this, greet one another with a holy kiss. Now, some of you may perceive that to be an opportunity for you on a Sunday morning, all right? But it would and could create a very uncomfortable environment for us, all right? Back in the day, it was familial in nature, and to demonstrate relationship and love for us, it might be a fist bump or handshake or hug or whatever, all right? So there are times where you just have to understand what you're reading. Remember, it's all context and what was happening in the moment. And then lastly, know Jesus holds a unique place of authority in the biblical story. And we sang about it, Jesus over everything. He's the center of the whole story. And we need to understand that. At different times in the New Testament, when Jesus spoke, people were absolutely blown away with his authority and how he spoke and how he taught. And when you read in the original language, this idea of authority, it just came up out of him. Right? It was who he was. It's like when you're talking to somebody and you just know they know what they are talking about, and that was Jesus. And to kind of put a bow on this and help understand what we mean when we say bringing the authority of the Bible over your life, I want to point to a story in John chapter 8, and Jesus is teaching in the temple, and bursting into the temple come these religious leaders. And look at what they do. John chapter 8, verses 4. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery. And placing her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. What do you say? And so they're all gathered around, and then so Jesus kneels down and he starts writing, and he's ignoring them. They're pressing in on him, and he's ignoring them. And finally he gets up and he's like, okay, so the first one of you guys that doesn't have any sin, you cast the first stone. And then he kneels back down and he starts writing again. Wouldn't you like to know what he was writing? We have no idea, but he was writing. And then as he's writing, he hears the thumps around him, all the stones that are dropping. And then he gets up and he looks at this lady and he's like, where are your accusers? Didn't anybody accuse you? And she said, no. And Jesus said, well, I don't either. Go and sin no more. Jesus was fully aware of the law, but he wasn't using it as a bat to beat her over the head and condemn her. There are other stories like that and engagement that Jesus had in the New Testament. You think about the woman at the well, and he was speaking to a woman that he shouldn't. One, she was a woman, and then she was a Samaritan. So that's not even his disciples, those who were following him, question that. What are you talking to her for? And in the conversation, he's like, yeah, go get your husband. And she's like, yeah, about my husband, like he's not my husband. And Jesus is like, yeah, you have 5. And the guy with you right now, he's not yours. He's not your husband. It wasn't like Jesus wasn't like in this condemning fashion. She goes and the whole city come out to Jesus. In those cases, Jesus was inviting them into the story. It was grace and it was truth. Inviting them into this new story of the kingdom. That's how we're to look at the scriptures. Even Paul says in his letter to the Ephesians, it's like, I want to invite you into this story where you grow up into the fullness of maturity in Christ so that you're not going to be tossed around like little kids with what you hear in the hallway, what you read on social media, what the norm is out there. A lot of followers of Jesus that are just getting tossed around, believing whatever they hear without immersing themselves in the story. For the Bible to be the authority in your life, in my life. And we need to regularly immerse ourselves in the story that it's trying to tell. It will transform your life. It will inform you of how to live, and then it will transform your life into the person that Jesus created you to be. So no homework this week. It's a catch-up week. You know, like catch-up weeks in school? So if you haven't listened to some podcasts, if you haven't read a book of the Bible from start to finish, or maybe you did in the Old Testament last week, move to the New Testament this week, immerse yourself in the story. It will radically transform your life. Would you pray with me? His heads are bowed and eyes are closed for a minute. If you're watching online or you came into this room, got to ask you the question, who's your authority today? Who are you submitting your life to? Is it to yourself? Is it to other people? Or is it to the one who created you? God loved you so much that he sent his only son, Jesus, that in him you would have life and you would have it abundantly. He would forgive all of your sin, start you out on a new path, make you a new creation. So maybe you're in this room or you're watching online and you have never trusted Jesus with your life. You've never bowed your knee to his authority in your life for him to be your Lord and Savior. Why don't you do that today? Stop chasing other people. Stop trying to please other people. Never works. Give your life to Jesus. Right where you are, you can just say, Jesus, please come into my life. Save me. Save me from my sin. Forgive me. Make me a new creation. Help me to be who you've created me to be. You are my authority. Maybe you're a follower in this room or watching online, and you've trusted Jesus, but you are allowing a lot of other stuff to inform your life. Why don't you confess that? Confess that to Jesus and say, you're my authority, and I'm going to align my life with you.